I would go back and say that health is wealth. So you can't get anywhere without first being healthy and having the ability to do it. So if you count that, let's say, as your first blessing, is the fact that you're healthy and you're able to earn income, that will get you to a stage that then you feel comfortable, whatever that income is when you're an investor, to stabilize your family and make sure, you know, you're providing for them in the best way. And usually real estate is, you know, that vehicle that gives you that freedom to do the family and the wealth.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's all about relationships. The more relationships that I keep, that I can impact, that I can influence, that I can help get from point A to point B to point C to point Z, and the more of those that I have in my life, the wealthier I am.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that one too. Yeah, no, I'm going to agree with that one.
That's
Yeah.
why I love you so much.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was tearing up a little bit.
yeah,
you know, yeah.
Do
that's-
Konos building your wealth?
I love you guys.
Okay, just checking.
awesome.
Just checking. Where are we on the balance?
No hugs for me.
Where are we on the balance sheet? Just let us know.
Didn't you write a book on it? Like, isn't there
Yeah,
like a whole
this
book?
is
Yes.
yours.
Yeah,
Yes.
right, yeah. So
This
I
is
guess
your
I am the
Sonia.
wealth builder, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so it all started because, you know, everybody kind of had this thing that wealth was like a bunch of money. You know, and for me, it was really where I say, you know, wealth is defined by assets, not things. And it's really not, it's like an individual have to define it for themselves. Like what makes you happy? What makes you whole? That's your wealth spot. That's your wealthy self. So really when you start looking at it, you realize that it's really not monetary. It's about that time, you know, having that time, having those relationships, having the family, having the health, all of that goes into you allows you to live you know, your wealthiest life. And I just found for me, over time, you know, I guess, you know, that whole idea of when did you know you were wealthy? When I really didn't have to do anything. And I just, everything I did, it was because I wanted to do it. And that's when I was like, oh, this feels pretty good. I'm on to something. And I kind of wanted to share that feeling, like for everybody to kind of get to that purpose place and get to that, you know, happiest place of where they are. And then it kind of spreads. It's like a, you know, a kumbaya moment.
Absolutely.
I started attempting writing a book here recently on the three main keys of Think Realty, which is time, wealth, and purpose.
Yeah.
And time, to me, seems to be a very simple concept. Purpose also seems to be a very simple concept. But wealth, I mean, there were three definitions just given.
Yeah.
And what I've seen and what I've been writing and trying to produce is this idea that wealth is actually more mental than physical, you know, and so it does take into consideration the friendships and relationships you have. It takes into consideration the health you have, you know, the purpose that drives you. But coming down to, you know, I don't know that I would ever consider myself wealthy because it really, like, you know, you almost feel arrogant or, you know, prideful to say I'm wealthy. You know, but I would define wealth as a never depleting source of something that if you spend as much as you need today, maybe not money, maybe it's time, maybe it's your health, that it's never depleted so that the source never runs out, right? So wealth is a larger source than I ever need. And so I've been working hard on this definition, and so it's been interesting because I actually had your book out the other day and was reading it, and there's so many great points to it. But you know, wealth to me is all those things. It's,
And you have to define it for yourself.
Sure.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
a term that people are uncomfortable. I
Yeah,
think you were
right.
right when
Yeah.
you said like, oh, I don't want to say I'm wealthy.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that makes me uncomfortable. It makes
Sure.
me.
And that's why I always call myself the wealth builder. Like you're
Yeah.
always building it. Like
Right.
you're never really, where is there?
right.
You know, where
Yeah.
is there? So it's wealth building. It's
Sure.
just always something that's going on. You're always building relationships. You're always building. You're always
Yes.
building on this foundation. And, you know, I think a lot of what drives me is ultimately this idea of legacy. This idea of, you know, what are your works going to say about you? What are people going to say? You know, how does your work make them feel? You know, the idea that people do pick up my books and walk away saying, you know, I did this for my family, or my life is so much better because I understand wealth more, you know, really makes me smile. It makes me understand that I have a bigger purpose and an impact of other people. It's not just myself.
Yeah, it has a lot of foundational elements, and those foundational elements I feel are different for everybody, right? You have the financial component, you have the career component, you have the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, the different relationships you have in your life,
Yeah.
the ability to travel, right? Like I think all of these things combined create this foundation that we call wealth. And over time, it will shift.
It will shift,
and
yeah.
it's a ever kind of growing.
What does it say when you give and you actually get that feeling when somebody else opens your present, as opposed to when you're opening a present?
Right, I love
right?
to, yeah, I'm just as
And I
excited
can't think
to.
of the endorphin
Yes.
or whatever. It sets off that endorphin. I think that's wealth, right? When
Yeah.
you see that smile that somebody
And you're paid, and you feel
Right.
like that's the best thing ever.
Right. You don't
Yeah.
need a present back. You're
It's-
just watching that.
It's really interesting though, because if you were to look at the world at large, our identifiers of wealth are always monetary or physical. You know, we look at a watch and we say, oh, that guy must be wealthy, or a car or a house.
Right, yeah.
You know, but then when you try to define it for yourself, you never think, well, I have a big house, or I have a nice watch, or I have
Right.
nice cars or things. It's just, it's really interesting. You go to those interpersonal
Yeah.
places, and you know, for me, wealth is having freedom. Wealth is having the ability to spend time with family. Wealth, you know, but I came from a place where I was trying to retire at a young age, and most people think that retirement is a byproduct of wealth.
Yeah,
Well,
it's not, yeah.
guess what? I probably had enough that I could have stopped working the rest of my life and then was bored and unfulfilled, and so I wasn't
Then you wouldn't have
necessarily
been wealthy.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
And so
right.
it's the craziest
some
thing.
money, you're bored.
It's ever defined, and
Yeah.
it's all ever evolving. But it is amazing. You know, I think there's all these byproducts of wealth too that are more indicators. I was in Shanghai, China last year, and we were sitting there talking, and one of the Chinese ladies who was sitting there with me, she said, "Who do you think the most wealthy person in the room is?" Right? And I thought, well, that's a really interesting question, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And so it's kind of like it's like the Holy Grail cup on, you know, Indiana Jones. You're like, don't pick the one that looks like the wealthiest. You know, like she knows something
right.
that I don't. You know, like I gotta pick the person who looks like the farmer in the
Right,
room.
right,
you know?
right.
And so I did. I was like, that person maybe. You know, like, and she was like, maybe. She was like, she said, I just was going to tell you that I'm probably the most wealthy person in the room. And I was like, you are? And she goes, yeah. She said, because think about it. And she starts, and then she defines well. She's like, I'm meeting people, I'm traveling.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
that was an unfair question.
It's a trick question.
You got me.
But, you know, but that's
but
what I
it's
think is
true.
so interesting about, like, even, you know, with Think Realty as a company to kind of lead off with time, purpose, wealth, as why people want to know more about real estate, because it does afford those things. And, you know, so the idea that I know tons of people, tons of millionaires, that you would say millionaires, but I also know that tons of them are broke. You know, just because they take in $1 million, it doesn't make them wealthy, because
Right.
the mindset or, you know, their purpose in life and things of that nature are not, you know,
Yeah.
intact. And so for real estate, for me, what it allowed me to do was, you know, kind of build this portfolio, build this kind of lifestyle that I'm able to do the other things and have, you know, the income and the time to do the other things that I think is really what people, you know, should
It's-
strive for, what most people are striving
It's
for.
interesting
Yeah.
you say that.
Holistic.
I had a friend that, you know, his dad was this NHRA drag racer, and they had all kinds of money. He was the kid that everybody looked at and was like, he's the wealthy kid.
Yeah.
And then they went through this really bad time. And I remember going over to his house and we'd play, you know, video games or whatever. And his dad, and you've probably heard this adage before, but his dad said, we may be broke, but we're not poor. You ever heard that
Yeah.
before?
Oh, yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it like as a
Yeah.
kid, it resonated like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I get it, because wealth
You
is
have so much more. You have the
Physical.
values, you have the relationships, you have the family, you have your health, you know,
Right,
for crying
right,
out loud,
right.
you know?
Yeah, I remember the very first show that we did for Think Realty Radio. It was with Sonia.
Oh.
And
I
we,
was the first.
You were the first. On January 1st, we did the
On
first
January
show.
1st, the first show,
And we
Sonia.
talked about this concept of wealth and what it really meant. And I feel one of the mistakes that new real estate investors make is you, right? You listening will make the mistake of, hey, wealth means the watch, right? Wealth
Right.
means the car. It means all of these materialistic things. And you end up leading a life that's really unfulfilled. And
Yeah.
I remember, you know, we talked about that, and you were just totally going on this topic, and I really absolutely liked it. So, I mean,
So we have to go back and listen to that.
Listen to that, absolutely. But it's truly, you create a foundation for the rest of your life, and it makes sense.